Did you ever think you could learn something from a clown in sports performance? Neither did we. But perspective is everything. And perspective is something that Jean-Francois Menard provides in a new light when it comes to coaching performance.
He's our guest on today's show, and he is widely recognized for his contributions to the field of performance psychology.
That he is. And we get to hear about his unique experience from his time with Cirque du Soleil, where he coached circus artists to deal with pressure and perform at their best on demand up to 450 times per year.
Whew. There's only 365 days in a year. That's a ton of performances.
I know, right? But it's no wonder that he's able to teach us a little something about the 80% rule, because let's be real, it's nearly impossible to give 100% to every performance when you're doing 450 a year.
True. And fast forward to today, where he's a founder of Cambio Performance and has since become a sought-after mental performance specialist.
What a life. Let's check out today's episode. All right. Well, today we are here with Jean-Francois Menard, and he is coming from us from Canada today. So thank you so much for being with us here. The Sport
My
Feels Like
pleasure.
podcast.
My pleasure. I wish we could be together in person because I'm guessing it's colder where I am than compared to where you are. So, but maybe that's another time.
I would imagine that we've got the sun coming out and warmer weather today. We might be up in the 80s from what I've heard.
Oh,
So
not in Montreal, not today.
Well, so just wanted to go ahead and give you a chance to share a little background for our listeners. We know you are a mental performance coach, consultant, professional speaker, you're an author, and you really specialize in elite performance and team chemistry. So if you could just share a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today as this established, well-known public speaker.
Yeah, great. So I actually became a mental performance coach by default. It wasn't the original plan. So I wanted to be a gym teacher, actually. So when I was in high school, I had this gym teacher that had a huge impact in my life. And I told myself, if I can do that one day to kids that are in high school, like I would like to be that mentor. So I ended up doing my undergrad in kinesiology. And then in my third year of my undergrad, I did a 2-week practicum in a high school here in Ottawa, Canada. And the kids were awful. They were just awful. They weren't listening to me. It was such a hard experience. And I was surprised because I was part of a really good group of students and we were respectful. And so I just expected that just kids would be like that whenever I become a teacher. And what a mistake. I think there's some good kids out there, but I got a bad batch during that practicum, but it ended up being probably the best experience of my life because I realized that maybe that's not what I was made to do. And ironically, arguably the best sports psychology program, applied program anyways, in the world at the time was at the University of Ottawa where I was studying. And I didn't know. But I was always perceived as a former athlete as being tough mentally, like having a great attitude and being confident. And I was often captain of my baseball team and hockey team. But I never understood why I was like that. For me, it was just natural to be hard-headed and to be perseverant and to set myself goals. And then when I found out there was actually some concepts and theories that talked about this, I was like, wow, this is me. I'm made for this. So I applied for the program because of my bad experience during that practicum, and I was accepted. And arguably some of the best years of my life. I was trained by some of the best people in sports psychology in Canada. So people like Terry Orlick and Penny Wertner, people that were actually working with our best athletes. And so they would come into classes and just basically explain to us what they were doing on the field. So could you imagine as like a 24, 25-year-old at the time, like I was, to be able to hear those stories and collaborate with these teachers? It was awesome. So I got out of that master's program, started a small consulting business in Ottawa, and also started my PhD in sports psychology at the University of Ottawa as well. And then I did about 1.5 years, and I applied for a job at Cirque du Soleil, the entertainment company. Their headquarters is in Montreal, Canada. And I didn't think I was going to get the job. I was 25 years old, no working experience. But I have the type of philosophy that, if you don't ask, you don't get. if you don't try, if you never try, you'll never achieve, right? Like, and I'm not afraid of the answer no. I'm not afraid of failure at all. And by the way, well, maybe we can talk a little bit more about this later, but that's what I noticed with a lot of top performers, regardless of the field, is they are really not afraid of failure. They're ready to jump in and to see what's going to happen, and then they adjust. But so I went through the interview process, and to make a long story short, finally they offered me the job. So I quit my PhD. So I'm an official school dropout. I'd like to say that. Moved from Ottawa to Montreal and started my professional career in 2008. So worked for 5 years in a circus. It was unbelievable to work with some of the best acrobats and jugglers and fire spitters and musicians and clowns from across the world. And I like to say that once you work in a circus, you can work anywhere, because you really do see it all. And not only any circus, like, I mean, we're talking about the best circus in the world. So I was very, very fortunate, privileged to work with some unbelievable people. And then in 2013, I started my business called Cambio Performance. So for people up there that speak Spanish, they know that cambio means change. So I'm in the business of helping people change, essentially, and eventually excel and deliver big. So for the past 11 years, I've been a CEO of a company. I've always had a team with me helping me out, and essentially been doing or practicing my craft in 3 different ways, as you mentioned, in coaching. So coaching elite athletes, but also people outside of sport, surgeons, lawyers, musicians, all kinds of people that deal with pressure, essentially. And I also deliver keynote speeches and workshops, and I also publish books. So I've been having a lot of fun doing that for the past almost 12 years now, and was very fortunate to represent Canada at the last 4 Olympic Games. And now getting ready for my 5th Olympic Games as a mental performance coach, and 6th Olympic Games in 2026 with the winter athletes. So in a nutshell, that's my past.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you have such a diverse background. I love the fact that you have a background in the Cirque du Soleil. We talk with so many different athletes, and that's not something that really comes to mind immediately for high performance. But when you really think about it, I mean, they're doing pretty scary gymnastics like moves, and they're doing it in front of a crowd that's expecting them to be perfect. And so I can imagine working with them would have been very unique. And so I guess, could you share maybe a story or something that, I want to hear a little bit more about that experience. So
Yeah.
what would be some of the conversations like with those performers?
Right.
What was their main struggle?
Well, if you really want to get into it, I think we're going to have to do probably 12 episodes on this podcast, because there's a lot to share. I'm just thinking of the audience that's listening to us right now. I'll share 2 things, because I know there's athletes that are listening, and there's some coaches that are listening as well. So I'm going to start with my first example is probably more related to athletes. So the reality of Cirque du Soleil is that they can do up to 475 shows a year. I mean, you talk about performance on demand and repetition of doing the same show night after night. It's not easy. So like, to stay engaged and motivated, it's a big challenge. It really is, because you do the same act. You have the same role, you do the same act. But what I would encourage the artist to think about is the audience members are different every single show. So in reality, you're not really doing the same show every night, because if you're really performing for the audience, which, by the way, as a professional artist, that's what you're doing. You're not really doing it for you. You're doing it for them, the people who are paying money to come see you, because you're an entertainer. You're not an athlete anymore, because a lot of them come from, gymnastics or acrosport, or where you perform for you. You're aiming for the national team or for the Olympics. But when you're a Cirque du Soleil artist, you're performing for an audience. Mm-hmm. And so to always take some moments during the show to connect with the audience, to look at someone in the eyes, or like when it's your turn to go in the audience, because sometimes they'll walk into the audience and kind of mingle with the people. to make sure you connect with them, to really have that pure connection, and to realize that, you know, that person that paid maybe $175 to come see you, they'll probably just see you once in their life. So you make sure that you deliver the best you can for that person. And there's 2,500 other people as well in the crowd, right? So, so I would tell them that. Another thing I would tell them is, when you perform so much in a year, you can't give 100% every show. You really can't. When I mean 100% is 100% of your energy, or like wanting to peak every show. It's impossible, because you're going to burn out. When you do 10 shows a week, you just can't do that. And I just make the link with some of these sports where they perform a lot, or if they train a lot, like, you can't give 100% every practice. And actually, this is for coaches as well. Like, you got to be careful when you ask your athletes to, you know, give everything they have every single practice, and kind of like that raw mentality. It doesn't work that way. For me, it's all about energy management. There's some moments where you can give a lot, and there's some moments where you should give less. If you're really tired and you're on the verge of getting injured, I think it's absolutely stupid, actually, to ask your athlete to give everything that day, for the risk that's there. So anyways, we can get maybe into that a little later during this chat. But so what I would tell them is, make sure you give 80% of what you have every show. Because if we have 60 cast members that give 80% of what they have every single show, we're going to have a wicked show. Because the audience members don't know the difference between what 80% and 95 or 100% is anyways. Like, an 80% capacity of what you're able to deliver is still really awesome. And we know with the costume and the music and the makeup, like, but if you give 100% the first show on Monday, and then 100% again the second show, and 100% again the third and the fourth, you're going to get to your sixth, seventh, eighth show, and you're going to be tired, and it's going to show. You're not going to be engaged anymore, not as much as you were earlier in the week. And it's the same thing in the second month or the 6th month or at the end of the year. So a lot of them, you know, athletes love numbers, right? So I would tell them, because for some of them that they didn't like that 80% concept, I would tell them, give 100% of your 80%. So give everything of that 80, like the best 80%. And then I would convince some of them, they'd be like, okay, you know, if there's 100% involved in there, I can give 100% of my 80. But it's just the mindset thing. So that really helped a lot of them that were accustomed of performing so much. Because if you take a gymnast that does maybe, you know, 12 or 14 or 15 competitions a year, to do 475 shows, that's quite different. And the other thing I would say for coaches is, I learned a lot from clowns. Clowns are some of the most fascinating, intelligent, savvy individuals I've ever met in my life. If you think of their jobs, like, they have to entertain people, and they don't know these people. And most clowns, especially in Cirque du Soleil shows, they're not allowed to talk. So the communication is it's all body language. And it's all about like timing, and like, you know, sometimes you're going to have to take an extra 10 seconds to convince someone in the audience to bring him on stage. Sometimes you got easy targets, but sometimes targets aren't very easy, and you're going to have to dig a little deeper to convince them. The same way for a coach, you might have easy targets in your team. You know, what I mean by easy targets is convincing an athlete to do something, or that to believe in your concept. But you're going to have some other athletes where you're going to have to dig a little deeper in the way you explain it. You're going to have to be a little bit more patient. So some of the best clowns in the world have taught me the importance of being present and really being attentive to small little details to what your people are telling you. So like, what are the face expressions of your athletes telling you? Like, how are they sitting or standing up in front of you? Do they have their arms crossed or not? Are they smiling or not? And when a clown goes into the audience and it's time to convince someone who's sitting in his seat and bring him on stage for 5 minutes and make a fool out of them, because they know what's coming up, right? You have to establish trust. But they don't have 35 minutes to establish trust. They might have 45 seconds.
Yeah.
So this one clown shared with me a quote that I'll never forget. And I had never heard this quote before. And we're talking already almost 15 years ago when I had this interaction with this clown. He said, Jeff, you need to make your people feel felt. Because when you make someone feel felt, you can do whatever you want with them afterwards. You have a meeting out of your hand. And we are in a society, Megan and Scott and everyone else that's listening to us right now, and this is very important. We are in a society where we are so distracted. It is unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, there's some studies out there that show that our attention span now is shorter than a goldfish. You might have heard this, it's 7 or 8 seconds before we get distracted. Like it's mind-boggling. And if you think of the job of a coach, it's to be attentive to your athlete's needs. That's your job. And so where's your phone when you're coaching? I'll just give that as an example because that's the biggest distraction. Where's your phone when you're coaching? Is it in your pockets? Is it vibrating? Is it dinging? Is it ringing? Because just getting your phone out of your way, putting it somewhere else, and not on the bench next to you, like in a separate room, or leave it at home, or like put it somewhere where there's no chances that it's going to distract you. Automatically, you're going to be more present. Automatically, you're going to make people feel felt a little more. Automatically, you're going to offer more attention. And in the end, that's all the audience member wants in the show. They want to feel felt. They want to be part of your world. Athletes want the same thing out of their coaches. And when coaches are very good at doing this, you become a better coach. And athletes respect that so much. And more in 2024, because unfortunately, those coaches are becoming more and more rare. The ones who are really, really attentive to athletes' needs, we're not going in the right direction.
No, those are some great notes. And I love the quote coming from a clown. I was the one question I had a little bit off the wall here is, if you had to fill in for a show, which piece would you fill in for?
Like myself personally?
Yes, you had to fill in.
For sure, a clown. For
Clown?
sure.
Yeah.
Clown are, we also call them characters because some of the characters on shows are clowns, but some are not like clowns in the sense of like having to do funny stuff. And they're characters that are part of the show. But the reason I say this, Scott, is clowns are characters in a Cirque du Soleil show. They're the heart and soul of a show. Like without them, there's no storyline. Because if you've seen a Cirque du Soleil show before, like it's a combination, an accumulation of different acrobatic acts and the clowns come in between the acts to kind of, merge the acts together, right? So I like to say that the acrobatic acts is like our skeleton. It's like our bones in our body, but without the muscles holding the bones together, like you don't have a human body, like it doesn't hold together, right? And so I like to be a connector. I like to be the one who gels things together. I think I do have that ability as a coach. I think it's my strong side as a keynote speaker as well, is to relate, is to connect with people in front of me. So I think that would be my answer. And I think just by default, I wouldn't be able to be a contortionist because I'm just not flexible enough. And I'd be afraid to injure myself. So at the age of 41, I'm not ready to go down that road. Maybe if I was 22, it would be different, but not anymore.
I don't think I could do that either.
Well, human connection. I love the notes you have. Feeling felt is a wonderful quote. Human connection. You as a coach, you as a performance coach, keynote speaker, drawing people's attention so that they believe that what you're telling them is important, and then they go off and use it later on is also just as important. So you shifted from all this experience and you continued to work with many people. Let's transition into your abilities and your successes with Olympians, right?
Yes.
The mindsets of Olympians and how you created your first book, and what experiences you've shared or learned along the way with those Olympians in your communication styles.
Sure. So one thing that's very unique about Olympic sport is that, as you know, you have to peak once every 4 years. And so 4 years is so long. And a lot of these sports, you only have really one shot. Like there are these sports, like if you take volleyball, for instance, like, can you win an Olympic gold medal at the Olympics from making many mistakes? Yes, you can, because you can lose a match or you can lose a set and still win an Olympic gold medal. If you take a track athlete, you have one shot, you have one race. If you screw up in that race, you don't have a second chance. And there's a lot of these other sports, it's the same thing. Like one of my clients is a mogul skier, so I'm aware maybe that a lot of people on this call don't know what mogul skiing is, but essentially it's a 23 to 25 seconds. You go down a hill, you ski a certain amount of bumps, anywhere from like 60 to 80 bumps, and you've got 2 jumps in there. And, you know, it's very steep and they go very, very, very fast. And the way it works is you got to ski the course 3 times in order to get to the finals. But if you don't make it past the first round, even if you're the best in the world, if you dominated the sport for the last 4 years, you're done. You got to wait 4 years to redeem yourself. And so the amount of pressure and the amount of tension around that is so, so big. And I admire Olympic athletes so much because they consider every single little detail that could potentially affect their performance. So there's one figure skater that I've worked with a lot of figure skaters, but there's one particular figure skater that I worked with, and this athlete has won several Olympic medals. And one thing that I admired a lot from this athlete is that this athlete considered sport a little bit like school. So like a competition was like an exam. And she was truly a student of her sport. And what I mean by that is like she would document everything. The same way that as a great student in class, you write everything down. And even though during that particular class, which might be a month and a half before the exam, you don't know if what you're writing down is going to be on the exam. You don't know if it's going to be valuable in the month and a half, but you still write it down. Why? Because just in case it is relevant, it will be important, you know you have it in your notes. So going into the Olympics, she had 2 binders filled with notes just from our sessions, just with me in sports psychology. And she would do the same in physical training. She would do the same with her technical training, with her coaches. And I've got pictures of her like going through her notes before a competition, the same way a student would go through the notes just before the exam, you know, just to make sure you know everything and you've studied every little component. Like, I don't know many athletes that do that. And a lot of athletes say they do it, but the way she did it, I can tell you there's a reason why she was the best in the world. It didn't happen by chance. She nailed her performances because she studied so well. And she had this approach where with all the training she would do and all the studying from her notes, she would show up to a competition very confident. But you know that moment before an exam at school where you studied everything you had to study, and then the morning of the exam, you go through your notes. And the reason you go through your notes is just to kind of reassure yourself that you know everything. And then when you go through your notes and you realize, like, I know everything. Like, I know every single detail out of this notebook. Well, you show up at the exam and you're not just very confident, you're convinced it's going to go well. And for me, being very confident versus convinced is not the same thing. Being convinced, it's like confidence on steroids. It's the difference between walking into the classroom and telling yourself, okay, like this is going to go very well, versus almost looking the prof in the eyes and you're almost like a little cocky and you can almost tell the prof, like, give me the exam. Like, you know in advance it's going to go well. And it's not pure cockiness. It's just you're so sure of yourself because you have no regrets. You've done everything to be ready for that particular moment. Well, she did that with sport. And it was amazing to witness. I've got other examples, like, you know, I've got this one skier that he'll study, like, so the way it works in his sport is the women compete at the same World Cups as the men in the same course. So he'll take some time to watch the women train, even though it means he needs to show up an hour and a half or 2 hours earlier for his training. He wants to go see the women train because he wants to see how the snow reacts to the skis, or he wants to see like which part of the course you can really attack a little more, and sometimes you gotta press the brakes maybe a little bit more. Well, there's no other male athlete that will do that, so therefore he shows up at the practice and is more prepared than all of his opponents. So these trainings happen the few days before the competition. So in his mind, if he does that, he always has an edge. He's always in front of all his competitors. Well, surprise, surprise, he wins most of the competitions. And so there's just these subtleties that some of these great athletes I've worked with, they're really willing to do stuff that's uncommon, really, and And most of the time, it doesn't come from their coaches. It really comes from them. And does it require more time most of the time? Yes. Does it require more effort? Yes, it does. Does it require more organization? Yes, it does. But in the end product, when it's time to deliver, you can see that they're more prepared than other athletes because they did that.
Well, thanks so much for sharing the specific story. It's really cool to paint the picture, and especially with the figure skater, I can't imagine just how few athletes actually do that, look through all their notes. And obviously it worked for her to feel prepared and convinced that she was ready to win. So I know you've worked with a lot of different athletes, and there is no one set formula as to what is going to generate success based on their training. However, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like there's a trend of being confident and feeling prepared for that competition, because like we talked about, the Olympics comes every 4 years. So how can you rule out any little hiccup that might happen on that day? So in your experience, have you found that maybe there is a couple set of tools that someone might be able to use to get closer to that path of being a world champion or Olympic champion?
Well, the importance of surrounding yourself with amazing people is more important than we talk about. Like I find we don't talk enough about this. I mean, nobody has success on their own. And when I think of all these Olympic champions I've been privileged to coach, I look at their team around them, from technical coaching to therapy that they got, or their agent, or just their friends and family. Like, it gives more meaning to their victories. Like, it's just like, yeah, for sure. I mean, they become champion. Look at the people they're working with, right? But you got to give credit to these athletes because they were the ones, in the most part, that chose these individuals. Like, they were very clever in surrounding themselves with people that were smarter than them, that were better than them in certain areas, and they're not afraid to be challenged. Like, again, that's another thing when I think of the athletes that I talked about are rather great athletes, and pro athletes as well. Not only because I work in professional sport, I work for a professional team, professional hockey team here in Montreal, the Montreal Canadiens. And I've also worked with professional football players, and what I've noticed is that they're willing to have difficult conversations. And what I mean by that is, if I think specifically the relationship I have with them, is the questions they ask me puts them in a very vulnerable situation, because and oftentimes they'll say, this might be a dumb question, or you might think I'm really naive, or like, it's so cute when they say that when they start, because I know what's coming is like, they feel kind of ashamed of asking the question, but in the end, there's a reason why they ask that question, because they really need that answer, right? And so that's something I've noticed with a lot of these athletes, is they're very, very savvy, strategic in surrounding themselves with people that they know will challenge them. And there's too many athletes still, or I would say even coaches, when it's time to select their assistant coaches, they'll purposely pick people that are like them. So they're mind liked, or they think the same way, or they won't be challenged. The best coaches understand that you got to stay away from that. Actually, you got to pick people that don't think like you. But you got to be humble to be able to decide that, or you got to be ready to have difficult conversations, because it's going to challenge you. But studies show that if you want to have a performing team, regardless if you're talking about a coaching team or a sport team, the actual athletes, the more different types of personalities you have on the team, the better. Like, studies show it. When they analyzed the Chicago Bulls back in the 1990s, and a lot of these other teams that were very good, the New York Knicks and the Utah Jazz, that dominated for years, that was something that was very clear about those teams, is that there was a lot of different types of personalities. Now, you need a coach that's able to manage that, but you want that. So yeah, so the top athletes I've worked with are very good at doing that. So another thing I would like to share is they are such great competitors. They love to compete. And I'll just give you an example. So one of my, I would say my top clients that I've been working with for more than 11, 12 years now, he competes at everything he does. Everything. So like when he plays cards, he's got to win. When he does an interview with a reporter, he's got to win the interview. He can't come out of the interview and have a feeling that the reporter kind of, controlled him or like he didn't answer properly. He's got to win the interview. He's got to win everything. So at some point I went to a training camp with this athlete, and I used to play baseball. I used to be a pretty good baseball player, and he used to play baseball as well as a younger teenager, and now is elite in another sport. So we brought our gloves during the training camp to play pitch and catch. And we started playing this game because we were just throwing the ball, and at some point he says, okay, we got to play a game. And I knew that was coming. And he said, let's be about like 75 feet, apart, and we're going to put our glove up, and you got to hit the target. And it's the first one to 5. So I was like, okay, let's play the game. But he didn't know that I was a pretty good pitcher. And so the first game we played, I won 5-0. And then he said, okay, we're going to play a game, and we're going to play again. I said, okay. So the second game, I won 5-1. And he said, we got to play again. Then I won 5-2. So we got to play again. And I won 5-0. I don't remember how many games we played, but I won them all. And he was so freaking pissed afterwards that he didn't beat me, that he didn't talk to me for the rest of the day. But I knew him very well. And I wasn't mad by the situation, frustrated. I knew that's just how he was. But I noticed that, and this is earlier in his career, I noticed that this guy, he's a champion in everything he does, and he wants to win at everything. And it translates so much in the way he trains and the way he competes. And that's okay. It's okay to have that. It's not for everyone, but that's his way of training his mind. He's always training his mind to find a way to win and to persevere and, to never let up. So, yeah. And listen, there's so many things I could talk about. I don't know why I was thinking about this when you asked that question, but I want to share this as well. So something very, very specific that I use that is very simple, but for some reason, athletes always connect to this is the concept of asking ourselves questions versus giving ourselves answers. So most of the time when athletes lack in self-confidence, or they self-doubt, or they're negative, or they don't feel very good about what's coming up, is they ask themselves too many questions without giving themselves answers. So if you think of the significance of, or the meaning of a question, like think about it. If we ask someone a question, you're in a shopping mall, you ask someone, where's the bathroom? The reason you're asking the question is because you're looking for an answer, correct?
Yeah.
Or if you're asking your teacher, like, I don't understand this math equation, can you please explain it to me? Question mark. The reason you ask the question is because you don't have an answer and you're looking for an answer, correct?
Yeah.
So the brain is fabricated, the brain is set up so that when it receives a question, it wants an answer. And so if, as an athlete, you ask yourself the question, like, how's it going to go this weekend? That's a question. Am I going to perform well at the next Olympics? That's a question. Is my coach, going to be good enough for me for the next year? That's a question. Is my agent doing everything for the purpose of my career? That's a question. And the list is very, 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 very long. So if we put this in a micro moment, the night before a competition, am I going to nail my performance tomorrow? Question mark. Am I going to be good enough tomorrow? Question mark. How good are my opponents going to be? Question mark. And as you two know, as athletes and coaches, athletes ask a lot of questions, a lot. And I would argue that athletes don't give themselves enough answers. And the only way to settle your brain, the only way to convince your brain that you will perform a certain way is you need to give answers. How am I going to perform tomorrow? Question mark. Well, from the way I've been training the last 3 weeks, I think I'm going to perform quite well. But your brain, it doesn't stop there. Are you sure? Because tomorrow's a world championship? Question mark. Yes, I'm sure. Because what I've done in the last several months, actually, it's stuff that I've never done. And I've worked really hard with my coaches to make sure we ticked all the boxes. Yeah, but wait a second. You compete against this person, this person, this person, like they're pretty good. Are you sure you're going to beat them? Question mark. That's how your brain works. It's going to go, it's going to go, it's going to push you, it's going to push you. But at some point, when you give so many answers to your questions, the questions stop. And you get to a place in your mind where it's like, all right, I've considered everything. I'm ready to perform. I'm ready to compete. And there's been a lot of moments at Olympic Games or World Championships, especially in these big events where, athletes will tell me I have a lot of questions. I'm asking myself a lot of questions. I'll tell them, well, make sure you give yourself answers. And there was this one moment, this was at the Olympic Games, just before the performance, the athlete was warming up and I was next to them and they were about to go take the field. And the athlete comes up to me and they hit me on the shoulder and they say, today I have a lot of answers.
I love that. Yeah, and that is such a interesting way to put it. I had never thought of it that way, but when you give yourself questions instead of answers, it has this room for doubt. Whereas
confusion, doubt, totally, exactly.
Yeah. Whereas if you give yourself an answer, you are sure that this is what you need to be doing and this is where you are. Yeah.
So to make it like so I just explain the concept, but sometimes if I'm texting with an athlete just before they compete and you don't want to go into huge details, I'll send a question mark and an exclamation point. So just to make them reflect, like, where are you in your brain right now? Are you in a question mark mind frame, or are you in an exclamation mark or point mind frame? And it's totally different. It really is.
Yeah. That's I love that. I really do, because all the best athletes want to know how to get better. And then once you've asked all those questions, even coaches, they want to know how to get better. But once you've done the research, once you've done the preparation, you should be giving yourself answers because there's no more time to prepare. The exam is here. You can't ask more questions about the material you're about to be tested on. So, but the reassurance that you had from the previous example with your figure skater, all the notes, all the preparation, like, you should be confident and convinced that you are prepared and that you have the answers. So that's a wonderful way to explain it. That's very easily digestible for people to understand. Like, oh yeah, it is simpler than I'm making it out to be, or I am prepared. So, well, Jean, thank you so much. We've gone over so many things that can help our listeners, help our coaches and athletes prepare and feel confident in what they're doing, as well as potentially ask the right questions, knowing they have the right answers. Where can our listeners follow you and find out more information about you and potentially learn more about all of your techniques and all of your experiences?
Yeah, so I mean, social media, like everyone else, primarily Instagram and LinkedIn. And also, I have two websites. So there's my CambioPerformance.com website, which is my company. And I have a new website that's coming out actually in a few days. It's my new professional speaking website. So it's jean-francois-menard.ca. I'm aware I have a French name. You might not know how to spell that, but if you just kind of, try on Google, you'll find my name. Or just click on, on this link and you'll see my name as well, obviously. So those would be the easiest ways to get in touch and to learn a little bit more about my expertise.
Yeah, and you've got two books out there, Train Your Brain Like an Olympian and Team Chemistry. So if anyone really liked what you had to say here today, they should definitely go check those out. And I personally would also love to check them out myself. So those are on Amazon too.
Yep, you can find those on Amazon.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I wish we had more time, but I think the time that we spent was so valuable, and I hope that anyone who listened to this podcast today can really gain something from it.
It's my pleasure. And if there's some more interest from people listening in, it'll be my pleasure to do version 2, another chat at some point. So just let me know.
Right. We love that.
Awesome, John. Well, thanks so much again, and enjoy the rest of your time on your next adventure. And we'll be cheering for you guys at the Olympics.
Awesome. All the best to you too as well. Cheers.
Thank
Cheers.
you. Hey guys, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. If you liked this episode, then please go ahead, subscribe, like, or comment. This helps us grow more than you know, so we can keep making more content like this.
Or you can visit us on sportfuelslife.com and register to become a member for free, so you never miss another podcast episode. Thanks for listening.
Do it. You won't regret it.